Under the blistering summer sun of 1879, in the cracked desert of southern Montana Territory, a grieving widow named Ruth Calder swings a pickaxe into earth as hard as stone. Beside her rests a tiny wooden coffin, her 4-year-old son, taken by thirst after miners seized the town's only well. No one would help her bury him. She is completely alone. Then, on the distant horizon, a Comanche warrior, Samuel Crow, collapses from his horse, wounded and dying under the same ruthless sky. What happens when a heartbroken white mother and a hunted native fighter, natural enemies in a divided land, cross paths at the brink of death? Can two shattered lives, torn apart by loss and hatred, ever find common ground? This frontier story of unimaginable grief and unexpected humanity builds to an ending so profound that it has brought millions to tears. Stay with me to the final moment. You'll see how hope can emerge from the driest, most unforgiving ground. If this opening gripped you, subscribe now. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and let me know. Would you have helped that fallen stranger in the desert? The summer of 1879 turned southern Montana Territory into a furnace. The desert floor cracked wide, fissures running like veins across the earth, baked solid after 3 relentless years of drought. Wind howled hot and dry through twisted sagebrush and prickly pear skeletons, kicking up dust that tasted of bone and forgotten rain. Ruth Calder knelt at the rim of a forsaken graveyard outside Beaverhead, the pickaxe heavy in her calloused hands. Her bonnet dangled uselessly at her throat, hair plastered dark with sweat. She swung hard. The iron head struck ground, rang sharply, and rebounded, sending jolts up her arms to her shoulders. Nothing gave. The soil was iron hard, baked into something closer to rock than dirt. She swung again. Sparks flew, her muscles burned, but she kept at it, rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Beside her, on the scorched earth, sat a small pine box, rough boards she'd planned and nailed herself the night before, no bigger than a saddlebag. Inside lay Elias, her 4-year-old boy, wrapped in the last clean remnant of her wedding quilt. He'd died 3 dawns ago. Started with thirst fever, lips cracking, eyes sinking. Their dug well had gone dry weeks back, just a damp ring at the bottom. The only shared water source left was the spring 2 miles nearer town. Then the miners came, 20 hard men trailing mules and wagons loaded for silver claims up in the hills. They camped right on the spring, drew it down to nothing in a single day and night. Mules drank deep. Men filled barrels. By sunrise, mud. Ruth had bundled Elias against her chest and walked those miles under blazing sky, begging at every door in Beaverhead. My boy's burning up. Need water. Need help. Faces hardened. Shoulders turned. The blacksmith muttered, "Drought don't spare nobody." The mercantile owner glanced at the child, then away. "Can't give what we ain't got." One woman offered a tin cup, half full, warm as blood. Ruth took it, but it wasn't enough. She'd staggered home alone by dusk, Elias gone still in her arms. No doctor rode out. No neighbors followed. Frontier charity had limits, and drought drew them tight. Jonah, her husband, had been taken 2 years earlier. Diamondback strike while stringing barbed wire. Folks turned out then, dug his grave quickly before the heat spoiled things. But that was before the skies closed up. Now, people hoarded every drop, every ounce of pity. Ruth raised the pickaxe higher and drove it down with all her weight. The impact jarred her teeth. Blood seeped from fresh blisters, streaking the wooden handle. She ignored it. The box waited. Elias waited. She would not leave him on the surface for coyotes and carrion birds. The sun hammered straight overhead now, turning the air thick and wavering. Heat rose in waves from the ground, blurring the distant buttes. Her dress clung wet, then dried stiff with salt. Breath rasped in her throat. Vision tunneled, but she kept swinging. Thud, spark, rebound. Thud, spark, rebound. She paused only once, to drag the back of her wrist across her eyes. Looked at the tiny coffin. Remembered Elias chasing a horned toad across the yard last spring, squealing when it squirted blood from its eyes. Remembered his small hand reaching for hers in the dark, whispering, "Water, Mama." She'd given him her last swallow, held him until the end. No marker yet. No words spoken over him. Just this stubborn patch of earth refusing to open its arms. Ruth gripped tighter, planted her boots, and swung again. The desert watched indifferent. Buzzards wheeled high, black specks against the white glare. Far on the horizon, a mirage shimmered like false water. She would dig until dark if need be, until her hands bled raw, until the ground took her boy. Alone, as everything out here ended. Alone. The sun climbed higher, turning the graveyard into a skillet. Ruth's arms trembled with each swing, the pickaxe growing heavier, her grip slick with blood and sweat. She'd carved barely a foot-deep scrape in the iron ground, nowhere near enough for the box. Breath came in ragged pools. The desert offered no shade, no mercy. Then movement caught her eye, far out on the shimmering flats beyond the graveyard fence. A rider, lone and low in the saddle, horse stumbling like it carried too much weight. Man and mount swayed, then the rider pitched forward, slid sideways, and hit the sand hard. The horse staggered a few more steps before folding its legs and dropping. Ruth froze mid-swing. Strangers meant trouble. She glanced at the pine box, then back to the fallen figure. Heat haze warped the distance, but the man wasn't moving. Buzzards banked lower. She let the pickaxe fall, grabbed the canteen, half full, precious, and started across the cracked flats. Boots crunched on alkali crust. Each step raised puffs of white dust. Closer now, she saw the horse first, sweat-lathered, ribs heaving. Then the man sprawled face down, one arm twisted under him. Dark hair long and loose, braided with rawhide. Buckskin shirt torn and blood-soaked at the side. Tattoos spiraled across exposed skin, black lines sharp as knife cuts. Comanche markings. Any white settler would have reached for a rifle. Ruth didn't hesitate. She rolled him over. He was solid, heavy with muscle. Face burned dark, lips split and crusted. A bullet graze furrowed his right hip, cloth stuck fast in dried blood. Breathe shallow, but there. She uncorked the canteen and poured a thin stream between his teeth. He choked, swallowed on reflex, poured again. His eyes fluttered but didn't open. "Easy," she muttered. "Not dying on my ground today." The horse whinnied weakly. She looped its reins over a dead cedar stump, gripped the man under the arms, and dragged him toward the nearest shade. A low overhang of red rock 50 yards back. Sand scraped his heels. He weighed like lead, but she hauled steadily, teeth clenched. Under the overhang, cooler by degrees. She propped his head on her rolled-up shawl, tore a strip from her petticoat, soaked it, and cleaned the wound. The bullet had torn flesh, but missed bone. Infection would kill faster than blood loss. His eyelids flickered. Dark eyes focused on her for a heartbeat, wary, then slid shut. Ruth sat back on her heels. The pine box waited in the open. But this stranger would bake alive if left. She cursed, stood, and rigged a drag from her belt and his lariat, tied it to the horse's saddle horn. Led the animal slowly, while the unconscious man slid behind on branches. 1.5 miles to her claim. Sun hammered every inch. The horse plodded. By the time the sagging fence came into view, Ruth's legs shook. The dugout soddy squatted against a low rise, half cave, half cabin, roof patched with canvas. She unhitched at the door, dragged him inside across the dirt floor. Cooler darkness. She laid him on the narrow bunk, her bunk, fetched the last bucket from the barrel, boiled a rag, and cleaned the wound properly. Packed it with chewed sage leaves. No whiskey left. He stirred, murmured in a rolling tongue. Comanche. Eyes opened fully. No fear, only calculation. She met the stare. "You shot?" He nodded once. "Bad men coming?" Another nod. "Then rest. They'll have to come through me." His fingers loosened on her wrist. Eyes closed. Breath evened. Ruth stepped outside, squinted at the empty horizon. No dust trail yet. She fetched the pickaxe and looked toward the graveyard. Elias still waited. But now there were 2 lives balanced against the desert scale, or none. She spat dust, shouldered the tool, and started back across the flats. The stranger could live or die. She'd given him the chance. Now the ground had to take her boy before nightfall. Behind her, inside the soddy, the Comanche warrior named Samuel Crow drifted in fever, unaware that the white woman who dragged him from death was fighting the same desert that had already claimed her son. The sun dipped low by the time Ruth dragged herself back to the soddy, pickaxe slung over her shoulder, hands raw and crusted. The shallow scrape she'd left at the graveyard mocked her, barely a dent. Elias still waited under the relentless sky. Inside, the air hung thick with sage and sweat. Samuel Crow lay on the bunk, eyes open, tracking her as she barred the door. He pushed up on one elbow, pain flashing across his face, but he held steady. She poured the last water into a tin cup and handed it over. He drank slowly, gaze locked on hers. "You pulled me from the sand," he said, voice gravel rough, English deliberate, edged. "Ground hot enough to fry meat," Ruth answered, sinking onto the stool. "Didn't need more carrion," a twitch at his mouth. Silence settled, wind rattling canvas overhead. He nodded toward the pine box in the corner. "Your boy." Ruth stared at the floor. "Elias." 4. Miners drained the spring. Thirst finished him. Samuel traced his bandage. Thirst hunts silently. Takes the small ones first. She looked up. "Your people?" "Comanche. Numunu." He touched the ink on his arm. Claws, lightning. "Moving north with women. Children. Mercenaries struck at Red Creek. I drew them off. They shot back." Ruth leaned in. "How many on your trail?" "Enough." He eased back. Night closed in. Ruth fed the stove and boiled tar-black coffee. They passed the cup. Talk came jagged. Samuel told of reservation boundaries inked far away, camps torched, graves bulldozed for iron rails. Sister died of pox on the forced march. Father's mount was killed for target practice. Ruth countered. Jonah, swollen from snakebite, dying alone. Neighbors once generous, now guarding wells with Winchesters. Beaverhead doors slammed in her face. Fire died low. Coyotes yipped outside. Fever climbed in Samuel. Ruth cooled his brow with wet rags. He seized her wrist suddenly, eyes burning. "Why save me? Your kind strings mine from trees." She held his stare. "Dessert aimed to take 2 things today. I wasn't letting it." He released her. Dawn grayed the chinks. Fever broke in sweats. Samuel stood, tested the wound, and balance returned. Ruth watched from the doorway, pickaxe ready. "The ground," he said. "Still fights?" "Hard as forged iron." He took the tool and weighed it. "Then we fight together." Ruth stepped aside. They crossed the flats under a rising sun. Samuel moved deliberately, hip stiff, no complaint. At the graveyard, he swung. Deep crack, earth yielded. Again. Power steady, relentless. Sweat carved channels through dust on his skin. Ruth shoveled loose dirt. They worked in silence. Hole deepened. 2 feet. 3. Sufficient. Ruth lifted the box and lowered it alone. Samuel stood bareheaded, wind pulling his hair. He knelt, palms to soil. Spoke Comanche low, rolling cadence, guiding the boy's spirit along wind trails to eternal water, to ancestors under open sky. Ruth's tears cut clean through grime, falling dark on dry earth, soaking instantly. Samuel rose, helped fill the mound, thud softly on wood. He sharpened cedar, drove it firm as a marker. They stood long. Heat lightning danced in the distance. Walking back, Samuel said, "Ground took him, gave something else." "What?" "Space for us both." If tales like this, stripped raw, where enemies share the same unforgiving dirt and find a sliver of common humanity, grab you by the throat, do me a favor, and subscribe. These old frontier stories need telling, and I'd like you riding along for the rest. At the soddy, Samuel scoured the pickaxe while Ruth boiled beans. Neither mentioned parting. The desert lay empty in every direction, but inside, the quiet felt shared for the first time in years. Days bled into weeks under the same merciless sun. Samuel mended fast, Comanche blood as stubborn as the land itself. He fixed the windmill blades Ruth had long abandoned, coaxed a trickle from the deep well Jonah had sunk before the drought bit hard. Water came muddy at first, then clear enough for coffee and beans. They worked the claims side by side without discussion. Samuel rode out at dawn, checked trap lines for jackrabbit, and scouted distant ridges for signs of pursuit. Ruth patched the harness, tended the 2 milk goats that had somehow survived. Evenings, they ate sparse jerky, flatbread, whatever greens Samuel found in hidden draws. No words about tomorrow. The mound in the graveyard settled, cedar marker holding firm. Quiet grew comfortable, like worn leather. Then the riders came. A dust plume rose south near noon, 5 horses walking slowly. Ruth spotted it from the roof where she mended canvas. Heart kicked. She climbed down, loaded Jonah's old Henry repeater, lever smooth from practice. Samuel stepped from the corral, shirtless, knife at his belt. He read the horizon the same as her. "Town men," she said. He nodded once. They waited in the yard, the sun hammering the packed dirt. Horses pulled up 20 yards out. 5 hard cases, beaverhead stock, storekeeper Harlan, 2 miners still powdered with quartz dust, the blacksmith and a ranch hand, Ruth recognized from the bar cross. Harlan swung down first, hat in hand, but eyes cold. "Afternoon, Ms. Calder." "Harlan." "We heard talk." He glanced past her to Samuel, who stood loose, weight on the good leg. "Talk? You got company. Company that helped bury my boy when none of you lifted a finger." Blacksmith spat tobacco. "That ain't the point. Folks say you're harboring a redskin, Comanche at that." Samuel's gaze stayed level. One miner leaned on his saddle horn. "Word is he's wanted. Shot up some boys on the trail. Army'll pay for him." Ruth's knuckles whitened on the Henry. "He's on my land. Paid his keep." Harlan stepped closer. "Ain't proper. Widow alone with a savage. Gives the town a bad name." "Bad name?" Ruth's voice cut sharply. "Town that let a child die of thirst while guarding barrels for strangers?" Silence stretched, wind whining through fence wire. The ranch hand drew a coiled rope slowly from his saddle. "We can do this easily. Hand him over. We'll see he's delivered properly." Samuel spoke for the first time, English clear. "Delivered to a tree?" Miner grinned yellow. "Something like." Ruth raised the Henry, barrel steady. "First man touches that rope, eats lead." Harlan's face darkened. "You protecting an Indian over your own kind?" "My kind watched my boy die and did nothing." She worked the liver, round chambered loud in the quiet. "Step off my ground." Standoff baked under the sun. Sweat tracked down faces. Horses stamped. Blacksmith broke first, muttered a curse, and reined away. One miner followed. Then the ranch hand. Harlan lingered longest, eyes flicking between Ruth's muzzle and Samuel's calm stare. "This ain't finished," he said, mounting. "It is for today." They rode off slowly, dust trailing. Ruth lowered the rifle only when they vanished over the rise. Samuel watched the empty flats. They will return. More. Ruth exhaled slowly. Then we make ready. That night, they barred the door early and banked the fire low. Samuel sharpened his knife by the lantern glow. Ruth cleaned the Henry and oiled the action. Outside, coyotes howled closer than usual. Somewhere far off, thunder grumbled dry. No rain, just threat. Word spread faster than fire through dry grass. Next days, no one rode near the claim, but riders skirted wide on the trail, eyes turned. Supplies stopped. Ruth's credit cut at the mercantile. Salt, coffee, and powder are gone scarce. Samuel scouted farther, brought back a pronghorn quartered on the pack horse. They smoked meat over mesquite, stored it high. Tension coiled tighter. One dusk, hoofbeats again. Single rider this time. Young cowboy from the bar cross, hat low, nervous. He stopped at the fence. "Ms. Calder, town meeting tonight. Vote on riding out to fetch that engine. Harlan is pushing hard." Ruth stepped forward. "Tell them if they come, bring boxes. They'll need 'em." Boy swallowed, wheeled, galloped off. Samuel stood beside her. "We leave before moonrise?" She looked toward the graveyard mound, visible faintly against the darkening sky. "No," she said. "Ground's taken enough from me." They loaded weapons, filled canteens, waited for the night, and whatever it carried. Far off in Beaverhead, lanterns burned late in the saloon, voices rising angry over whiskey and fear. The desert held its breath. Moonrise silvered the flats when the riders returned. 12 this time, torches flickering like angry eyes against the dark. Hooves drummed slow, deliberate, raising ghost dust that hung in the still air. Ruth and Samuel waited in the yard, backs to the soddy wall. Henry repeated across her arms, loaded full. Samuel held Jonah's old Navy Colt in one hand, long knife in the other. 2 rifles leaned ready against the doorframe. Goats bleated nervously from the corral. Torches formed a half circle 30 yards out. Harlan at the front, face lit orange, rope coiled on his saddle. Others fanned behind. Miners, ranch hands, even the preacher clutching a scattergun as it burned him. Harlan raised a hand. Horses stopped. "Last chance, Ms. Calder," he called. "Send the savage out. We ride peacefully." Ruth's voice carried flat. "You ride off peaceful, or you don't ride at all." Muttered curses rippled through the line. A miner swung down, torch high. "Burn the place! Flush him!" Flame arced toward the roof. Samuel's Colt cracked once, sharp, final. Torch spun midair and landed harmlessly in dust. Miner yelped, grabbed his shoulder, stumbled back. Silence dropped hard. Harlan's horse danced. "You just shot a white man over an Indian." Ruth levered around. "He threw fire at my home. Next one throws lead." Torches wavered. Men shifted uneasily. Samuel stepped forward into the torchlight, unarmed now, both hands empty, palms open. He began to sing. Low at first, then rising. Comanche chant, rolling like distant thunder across open plains. Words of earth and sky, of children sleeping safe under stars, of blood spilled enough. Voice deep, steady, cutting clean through the night. Ruth stood firm beside him, rifle lowered, but ready. One rider, a gray-bearded rancher who'd lost a son to fever years back, let his torch drop. Flame hissed out in the sand. Another followed, then a third. Preacher's scattergun dipped. Harlan snarled, yanked his reins. Cowards! But the circle broke. Horses turned. Torches guttered one by one until only Harlan's burned. He sat alone a long moment, glare hot as the spent flames. Finally, he spat, wheeled, and spurred away. Hoofbeats faded into the dark. Quiet returned, broken only by wind and distant coyote answer. Ruth exhaled slowly, tension bleeding from her shoulders. Samuel's song ended on a low note that lingered. They barred the door and banked the stove. No pursuit came again. Weeks slid into months. Rain never fell heavily, but the deep well held. Samuel taught Ruth to read sign in sand, where water slept under stone. She showed him letters from her old primer, words scratched in dirt with a stick. He carved Elias's name deep on a flat cedar plank and set it firm at the grave. Grass struggled up around the mound, thin, tough blades that somehow took root. The town kept its distance. Supplies ran low, then lower. They hunted, gathered mesquite beans, and traded jerky with distant travelers who asked no questions. Years turned. Samuel's hair grayed at the temples. Ruth's hands grew harder, face lined deeper by the sun. They added a room to the soddy. Stone and mud, roofed tight. Goats multiplied. A scraggle garden took hold in the draw. No preacher bound them. No paper claimed them. They simply stayed. Two people the desert had tried to break and failed. Nights, they sat on the stoop under stars, sharp as broken glass. Samuel spoke sometimes of wide plains lost forever. Ruth spoke less of Elias, but her eyes softened toward the graveyard when the wind carried right. One dawn, far thunder finally brought rain. Thin silver sheets sweeping across the flats. Earth drank greedily. Sage bloomed suddenly purple. Ruth stood in the downpour, face up. Samuel beside her, water streaming down her ink and scar. The desert had taken much: child, husband, land, mercy. But it had left them this: ground that held a small grave, a shared roof, and two lives stubborn enough to outlast the killing sun. Under Montana's vast night sky in the summer of 1879 and the hard years after, wind still blew hot and dry. Yet sometimes, faint across the flats, travelers claimed to hear a low Comanche chant, answered by the creak of a windmill turning slow, sign that something human had taken root where nothing should grow. And the mound, with Elias Calder's name, stood quiet, grass holding firm against the sand. Out here, on the edge of the 1879 Montana desert, Ruth Calder and Samuel Crow, two people divided by everything the frontier taught to hate, chose to stand together against thirst, loss, and a mob lit by torches. In the end, the ground kept its secrets, but it also let something stubborn and human take root, where nothing should have grown. What about you? Would you have opened your door to a wounded stranger the world called an enemy? Or would fear have won? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to hear them. Thank you for riding through this hard land with me tonight. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and stay close. More raw frontier tales are waiting just over the next ridge. Until then, keep your canteen full and your heart open. See you soon.